This is KPPQ LP Ventura, 104.1 FM, and we're in the Women's Room, where we appreciate and support each other. I'm your host, Kathleen Good. Today's show is part 2 of an interview with my guest, Ed Wehan, a man who steps up and does his part for the community by working on various boards of directors for local nonprofit organizations. Hi, Ed. We're so happy to have you here today, and for the second time, no less. There is so much to talk about when it comes to nonprofits and the boards of directors that govern them. But first, to introduce yourself to our listener and to recap some of what we talked about in part 1 of our interview, perhaps now would be a good time to mention board work that you have done and the 2 that you are currently serving on, and provide our listener with the mission of that nonprofit.
Kathy, again, thanks for having me back on this show.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
It's interesting and exciting, that's for sure.
That's good.
So to start out, when I go back in my history way back, I started out with the city of Ventura as a member of the Parks and Recreation Commission, which is an advisory commission to our city council, providing them input from members of our community as to decisions that they might make one way or another on particular issues that come to them. But also served for 6 years on the board of CAPS, which we're involved with here, which, as you would well know, is engaged in communications in our community, informing our community through digital media. I also served as president of the board of the Ventura Community Partner Foundation for 2 years, which is a nonprofit arm that supports parks and recreation.
Oh.
A lot of people hesitate to donate money to the city, let's say to the Parks Department, but this nonprofit is set up so you can donate to them. They have their board of directors oversee all that, and they can contribute to programs and services throughout the city that make sense to that particular board.
Oh.
Then I was on the board of the Ventura Education Partnership, and I currently serve on the board and the executive committee of the Ventura Visitors and Convention Bureau, and also on the Ventura Land Trust, an advocate of open space, public access open space here in Ventura, where people have the ability to go out and just explore from sunrise to sunset.
Okay, well, you're really involved in a lot of entities here in the community. So nonprofits exist to further a social cause, in contrast to the private sector, which generally functions to make money or profit. Would you talk generally here about the way nonprofits are organized, like the board, staff, management, director, volunteers, partners?
Sure. The board of directors is like an umbrella that oversees a lot of the general aspects of what a particular nonprofit does. Whether it's the finances, they hire the executive director, all the ethical and legal elements of it, the fundraising, they provide all of those support. Underneath that is normally your executive director, who is like the president of a company.
Right.
Who runs, he does the hiring, he or she does the hiring, the firing
of the staff.
And make sure that it's adequately staffed and follows what the mission is and tries to execute and reports to the board and updates the board on what's happening there. And then many boards, like the Ventura Land Trust, they may have 500 to 1,000 volunteers.
Oh, my goodness.
That come out and support the kinds of programs that the Ventura Land Trust does, whether it's planting trees, clearing brush, taking care of other issues like that. So that's pretty much, I think, how that works.
Okay. And what about partnering with other agencies and nonprofits in the community?
Certainly, the organizations that I've been involved with, your relationship with the city of Ventura is important. The city provides a lot of direction, a lot of access, a lot of support to whatever you may be involved in. But over and above that, you do work with other nonprofits. Ventura Land Trust, for instance, works well with, I think, the Ventura Botanical Gardens.
Oh.
They also work because they do work out of the Ventura Estuary with the fairgrounds. So no matter where you're involved, Visitors Convention Bureau works with the National Park Service.
I see.
So it is necessary you create that little niche of friends and groups around you. Try to leverage those and help each other to be successful.
Well, it's cool. Well, let's stay with the concept of partnering with other agencies, other nonprofits, and even city government. Yeah. Nonprofits seem to me to be a good model for a softer, kinder capitalism. Some of the more feminine principles of cooperation, nurturing, meaningful work, caring, rather than the generally masculine characteristic of competition, which can involve greed, progress at all costs, lack of concern for people and environment, which all of these can be a hallmark of the private and corporate sector. And, I'm bringing this up not to disparage making money by businesses, of course that's necessary, but in this time of corporate billionaires holding most of the wealth, and coincidentally the rise of women and the need for their point of view at the meeting table, it might be meaningful to address the feminine features of a nonprofit. I wonder if you could expand a little on this idea and perhaps tell our listener what some other features of a nonprofit that reflects women's values.
I think we've been fortunate over, I don't know how many years now, and maybe it's just not Ventura-centric. I think it's much broader than that, that women have become more active and involved in our organizations, in our nonprofits. We've talked a little bit about our boards, that they play a major part now in most of the boards or commissions that I've been involved in, and they provide accurate, honest information that I think keeps those nonprofits ethical, legal, whatever. They provide a really, really good resource. Over and above that, generalizing a little bit, I think they look at the issues as how we as a community can take care of things.
The cooperation.
The cooperation kind
right.
of thing. And you can look at that at a national level. We have good government because we're all interested in good government. It's not because it's all about me and what I need. Sometimes I need to give up a little bit more to make the pie bigger for everyone, including myself. And I think women are really attuned to that and have a great ability to move that kind of spirit forward. And I suppose for that reason, that's why my daughter is always wearing that "Elect Women" T-shirts. So she's out there espousing all of that. So
okay. Well, thank you for that. So why is it so important for nonprofits to be accountable, trustworthy, and deal with openness to every person interested in the nonprofit entity? Why is this really important?
Well, it is important for a number of reasons. One, because there are laws that we all have to abide by. All nonprofits have to abide by. That's not to say that they all do. And when they don't, they take away the public trust. If you want to raise money, you have to convey the fact that you have a good board of directors, you have a good mission, and that the money that's being used is going to be used for what you say it's going to be.
Right.
There are issues where there have been nonprofits, particularly in Washington, D.C., perhaps, where money has been raised, where who knows where the money went, and there were challenges involved, and that brings up questions, and people become more hesitant to become involved and to support those kinds
or
of
to
things.
donate
And
to
to donate. That, very much for sure.
So how exactly does a nonprofit work? I mean, the term is somewhat self-explanatory, nonprofit. So even though the NPO, nonprofit organization, may charge for services, the goal is not to make a profit. So where do nonprofits get their support in terms of money?
That's always a challenge.
Okay.
at least in all the nonprofits I have worked in. Not one that can't be overcome, because with passion you can convey your needs and people will support you. But I would say that a lot of the money can come from grants from other foundations and organizations, from the federal and state governments. A nonprofit can get grants, whether it's for homelessness, whether it's for open space, whether it's for those kinds of issues. So that's one big area. The other area is from the community. If you're providing a service to the community, people in this community have an interest in senior issues, homeless issues, open space issues, land use, environmental issues. So a lot of money can be raised from that as well. And then your local government can help out as well. Normally they provide grants to nonprofits to help and facilitate what the nonprofit's doing as well. So that's generally where a lot of the money comes from. The board of directors is responsible for making sure that all of those pots, are taken care of. And the board often goes out and is involved in the fundraising and is out there in the community talking to people, trying to get them to have the same passion that they do to support whatever the issue may be.
So are there some individual donors to the nonprofits, or is generally larger grants funding?
That's a good question, and I would say there are two different issues there. There are some very good individual donors that I'm pleased to know who they are, and they have been very supportive financially of whatever I might have been involved in. And the reason for that is because they have a passion for what that is.
Right.
Yes, I'm totally support. I'm on this. And so that's a real big one. The other one could be local corporations. We have a couple corporations here in town, one of which I think you probably know, that are big supporters of environmental causes. And without organizations like that, and there's several others here in Ventura, not just Patagonia, but others as well, who believe in what's being done and have significantly contributed to that as well. So it's both individuals and corporations, plus the other people we talked about as well.
Okay. With all your experience, perhaps you could put our listener into the picture about the relationship of the board of directors to a nonprofit organization. To this end, I have a few questions for you just to kind of clarify for our listener. So is having a board of directors for the nonprofit required by law? I mean,
it is. It is required by law.
Okay.
And there's a web of legalities the board has to abide by, whether it's federal law, state law, whether it's IRS. So the board of directors is required. People are giving their money to an organization. They want to make sure that it's being used appropriately.
Right. Is the main function of the board to ensure monetary accountability of the nonprofit, or is it also, to ensure the mission statement is being enacted by that nonprofit?
The mission, the function of the board, I don't want to say it's a complex one. It's a pretty direct one. Is it financial? Very much it's financial. The organization does not exist without the financial.
Right.
But that can mean a lot of different things. Do you have a good executive director? Is that individual, is he or she spending the money appropriately? You take a look at your budgets every year, your budget forecasts. Is your income meeting the needs of what's being budgeted? Fundraising. The board is involved in fundraising. Are they supplementing what's being brought in under normal circumstances to make sure that everything that can be done be done? So the financial part that you're talking about there is important, but there's several other overlays that sort of connect to that as well.
Okay. Are board members volunteers, or do they get paid?
I haven't gotten paid yet. So
Okay, you're a volunteer.
my dear mother passed away years ago, and she always was interested in things I got involved in after I retired.
Uh-huh.
And I tell her, and her question always was, well, how much are they paying you? And of course, to break her poor little heart, I'd have to say, well, I think I'm volunteering here. To answer your question is, no, as far as I know, we're all volunteers.
Uh-huh.
We do it for the passion, for the interest, for our love of what the organization is doing.
Do salaries of employees of a nonprofit match those in the private sector?
I would be guessing about that because I honestly don't have that information. We have very good people. I think sometimes in nonprofits, there's an offset a little bit where salary is important to the employee or the person, but the passion for the objective of what, or the mission of what the nonprofit is attempting to accomplish is almost as important. So the balance there between the two probably makes it work for that individual. If that individual, instead of working for, let's say, Peer Under the Stars or the Peer, instead of doing that, they went to work for some private company, they may stall out in the private company or just not have a happy life, but they love volunteering and helping with the Peer. So there's a trade-off there. Dollars for dollars, maybe not quite, but passion certainly hopefully offset some of that.
So you've taken my next question here, that really the staff is motivated because they do tend to make less if they worked in a corporate kind of setting, they probably make more for the same job, but it's a passion.
It's true. For instance, the Ventura Land Trust, most of the employees have biology backgrounds, environmental backgrounds, things that they went to school for and they have a passion and interest for. So they love what they're doing because they look out there and they see a clean estuary, they see a mountainside, they see people enjoying the fruits of what they're doing. So a lot of benefits to that.
So who are nonprofits accountable to?
They're accountable. There are agencies, federal laws, and state laws that at some level you're accountable to. But certainly they are accountable to the board. And the board may be somewhat accountable to a national organization. Ventura Land Trust is just in the process of getting its national accreditation. So that's important to some nonprofits, not to all of them. They're also accountable to their donors.
Oh, right.
People really want to know what's happening with their money, and so you've got to report to them.
Okay, well, let's just leave it right there for a moment and take a station ID. This is KPPQ LP Ventura, 104.1 FM, and we're in the Women's Room, where we appreciate and support each other. I'm your host, Kathleen Good. My guest today is Ed Wehan, a man who steps up and does his part for the community by working on various boards of directors for local nonprofit organizations. And we're into part 2 of our interview. Okay, and we're back, and we were just talking about some of the, intricacies and the legal aspects of a nonprofit organization. And the next question I wanted to ask you on that, are there rules or laws governing a board?
There are. I would say overall, just as a caveat here, I've been on all these boards, nonprofit boards. Much of when we're dealing with the legalities, the financial part of it, obviously people should look, to a better resource probably than I am. This is everything that I have seen. So some of it's my opinion, but also it's based on stuff that I've read. So it's pretty good, but do your homework out there as well too. But there are state and federal laws. Nonprofits in particular, there are many federal laws they have to abide by. In some cases, state laws. So and tax code laws as well. So they are pretty much monitored.
There are bylaws governing it. Yeah.
And there are bylaws in their bylaws. There are ways to act and how to react and what to do, what to file, when to file, who to inform, and when and how and why to inform.
So The charitable status is determined by the IRS, and that it ties in with the numbers like 501c3, which is a certain type of nonprofit. So, what do these numbers denote to you?
Well, what they denote to me is I need a CPA in order to really figure that one out.
Oh, okay.
But 501c3 is the common designation. I know that there are other smaller ones.
Right.
This is the predominant one, and it's part of the tax code that allows for the nonprofit status. So it's important that an organization, a nonprofit, have a 501c3 or something that's comparable.
Right. I think it's based on, just looking this up, based on what type of nonprofit it
Right.
is. So, like Caps Media fits under the 501c3. But it's really the tax exempt status
Right.
of a nonprofit. So, what kind of taxes are they exempt from?
They're exempt from most federal taxes.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of sales taxes,
Oh.
or not sales, I mean state taxes.
Uh-huh.
They are not exempt from sales
Oh,
taxes.
I see.
So
Uh-huh.
there's probably like sales taxes and some other taxes that they do have to pay like everyone else. But most federal and state taxes, they are exempt from.
So, also, donors can claim a deduction for donating to that charitable organization. Now, this is a big selling feature, I would imagine. Yeah.
It is. There's been recent changes in the tax law
Uh-huh.
that affects this somewhat.
Oh,
But again, it depends on a lot of issues, and an individual obviously should see their tax accountants before they figure this out.
right, right.
Because there's standard deductions and then there's regular deductions, and I think if you're standard deduction, that sort of limits what you can deduct. But
Right, and people could, before they donate, can check on
and they
whether,
can check and all that. But
yeah.
I mean, I would tell everyone, don't look at it that way. Look at the passion. Look at what the mission is.
Oh, okay.
Look at what your passion is. And sure,
Right.
if you get a tax deduction, that's great. But if you're enhancing the great outdoors, if you're helping with the homeless issue, if you're helping with the environmental issues, just go ahead and do it.
Okay, I like that. So, how could a nonprofit lose its tax exempt status? Have you had any experience with this?
I think if you abuse elements of the organization, for instance, if you were given a donation of something, let's say a sofa, and the value was $200, you gave the person, a $5,000 donation slip saying he gave us $5,000 and it was really only worth 200, you'd be in trouble.
Yeah, okay, I
So,
can see that.
Yeah, there are all of those types of things. If the money that you take in is used in an inappropriate way that's not attuned to
The mission
the mission
statement?
statement
Uh-huh.
and and particularly if it's used personally or in some
Like-
ways that would be totally inappropriate.
Like buy a car.
yeah,
yeah.
or you
Take a trip.
buy a picture of yourself. Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
That would be a very challenging thing to get away, or should be a very challenging thing to get away with.
Yeah, really. So, why do you think the government allows these tax exemption to nonprofits? I mean, it cuts into their, funding, the government funding.
The government, depending on where we are, can only provide so many services throughout the community. And to sort of supplement that and help support that, the nonprofits can come in and step in. Homeless issue. Isn't that a national issue? It is, but has it been covered nationally? Not really, and that's why
Right.
other organizations have stepped in to help with that, and that's one of the reasons, in order to encourage that, the government has allowed that nonprofit status to occur. The same thing for environmental, for any number of other issues as well.
Right. And also the government, instead of having to hire people to do this, they have a lot of passionate volunteers like yourself.
They
And myself, I would add.
They do, although, I would say, Kathy, that nonprofits can't be an excuse for the lack of government support.
Uh-huh.
When we have needs, whether in my mind it's climate change, environmental issues, homeless issues, health issues, there is a place for the government to stand
Yeah.
up and take responsibility. And by that it means all of us standing up to do it.
Right.
Nonprofits step in when perhaps that's not always fully funded or when some aspect of it isn't fully funded. So nonprofits are important, but the government shouldn't use them as an excuse
Right.
not to do something.
Okay, I understand where you're coming from there. So, talk a little about how nonprofits provide social services that fill the gap local government often doesn't have the resources to supply. And this is the way, we talked about this in the earlier interview, the way they interface with city or county governments. If you could give us an example of that from your experience.
Sure. I'd be projecting a little bit, but here in Ventura or other places, we have issues such as homelessness, poverty, hunger, climate change issues, education, animal cruelty, gender issues, where the government can't, or at this point can't fully become involved in those kinds of social issues. They don't have the funding to do it or the wherewithal, and that's where a nonprofit can step in. Not to complicate things, but in some issues, religious beliefs preclude certain support systems that maybe a nonprofit can step in and provide and keep the government out of going one way or the other on that particular issue. So the nonprofits are pretty important in those areas.
How many nonprofits roughly do you think we have in Ventura County? Hundreds? Thousands?
Well, to start off with, I'd say I have no idea.
Oh, okay.
But
I tried to look that up.
I can give you perhaps some fake news. You're probably right. There is an organization, Ventura County. There is a nonprofit entity here in the county that probably has a better number on that than I have. Excuse me, than I have. There's a really good organization here in the county. California Lutheran has a nonprofit organization, academy, where they provide resources and help to all the nonprofits throughout the county. So that's important.
Okay. Well, we're just going to have to wrap up here, but I have one final question. If your listener is thinking about volunteering or maybe sitting on a nonprofit board, where would you suggest he or she look first?
Thanks, Kathy. It's a good question. I would start out by volunteering. I think that's important. What's your passion? What's your interest? Is it the environment? Is it homelessness? Is it the Sierra Club? Is it the Pier? Whatever it may be, volunteer. Make sure you enjoy what they're doing. Move up, get to know people, and eventually join their board. That's the best way to be involved. And that'll make you may join an organization and find out you don't like it. So why jump right to the board when it doesn't make any sense?
Exactly. Okay, well, Ed, thank you so much for coming in to acquaint us with your work with nonprofits, and thank you for your service to our community.
Thank you for having me, Kathy. It's been very enjoyable.
Oh, good. I'm glad. My guest today is Ed Wehan, a man who steps up and does his part for the community by working on various boards of directors for local nonprofit organizations. This is KPPQ LP Ventura, 104.1 FM, and we're in the Women's Room, where we appreciate and support each other. I'm your host, Kathleen Good.